One. Oils, and you can replace them with avocado oil. It's a lot better for you, less inflammatory type of oil.
As he's fighting to keep the NLRB from officially making the change. Joint employer is an essential role for millions of American workers.
The Supreme Court has ruled that the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Speaking of notice, is that Australian news? Hey man, all right, it's Australia. And there's never been a news. Just that we're doing news, that's something we can't also do some drugs and have some fun. Why don't we take our tops off while we do this? They taking the news seriously. Well, emergency services were unlawful. Here to explain is that medical. It was unlawful. Oh yeah. Let's go, Dr. Nick. Dr. Nick, he's gorgeous. I've seen him before, actually. He's good, this guy.
Morning to you. It's pretty extraordinary, isn't it? Can you walk us through the room?
Maybe sashay us through it, or dance us through it. Express yourself through movements like we do on the Australian news.
It is extraordinary, Cal. Before I do that, I can't do this segment without acknowledging my own role in the system that promoted vaccine mandate.
Right, okay, that's someone connected to the pandemic admitting that they made a mistake. I think I'm going to take it. I'm going to cry. I'm having to literal damage the environment here. Like, what? You're taking responsibility for your actions. Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, that you should take the vaccine and that we should all lock down. And in retrospect, looking at the data, that wasn't correct. Heretic, apostate. Like, it's not a religion, is it? You'll see in our conversation with Fran Paul later that there was a line to follow all the way through this pandemic period, and it's integrity and science, the very words, in fact, or ideas, concepts that were being deployed against the vaccine hesitant, as they call them, and the very content science itself that was being most subverted, i.e. it became an orthodoxy and an ideology on their side, rather than just the neutral, objective analysis of information. We look now to Australia, to our new risen king, who admits for the first time in the political sphere that they've made a mistake.
There's strong public view that those who choose not to get vaccinated there needs to be some sort of incentive committee to take a big stick, perhaps, through the current programs.
They hit with a stick. Oh, no. But then was not Saul the tax collector converted to Saul? So he's gone from people don't want to take the vaccine, he's hit it with a stick. Offer them the carrot, but even if it's a particularly hard carrot, you could use that as a stick. I've been hit by a carrot before, it's quite painful. So it's gone from saying to use physical coercion in order to get people vaccinated to a mea culpa, an acknowledgement that people are, can you feel yourself beginning to heal? More healing than a lot of medications we're on for the last few years. When you tell you
including no job, no pay, to
no jab, no pay. No jab, no job, no job, no pay. Simple as that. I mean, I suppose we didn't go for the alliteration, the letters fell, the poetry, but he did still say no jab, no pay. But look, he come right out there and admitted it.
make that happen.
I think as a general principle, we could all agree that mandates have a time-limited role in a pandemic. The dispute and the question will be how long should that time be, and what is a reasonable level of community vaccination to achieve before we abandon mandates.
So Nick Coatsworth, Dr. Nick Coatsworth, you're a hero to me. I look to you as an example, and I'm leaving this your sincerity. You make a mistake, you admit you made a mistake, you do your best, you put it back. If you make a mistake, you lie about making a mistake, you make a bunch of laws about your mistake, you conceal your mistake, you conceal the information that people might give to reveal the mistake was made. This is the sort of stuff that Rand Paul leaves this up to
Argue, not quite at the moment. I agree entirely that they're time limited.
You're right to point out that you're a government official promoting vaccines during the pandemic. You're a big boy to defend yourself. You get
I'll show you new. Right, you're a big boy. I mean, look, would you mind actually standing up for a moment, seeing exactly what time to pull you up? Put the music back on. Put the music back on.
Well, I think certainly we didn't get it wrong promoting the vaccines, Carl, but
Come on, a little further to go.
the mandates, yes, I think we did get that wrong. And I think you can say hindsight is 20/20, but Carl, hindsight gives us foresight. And if we
Now, hindsight is just foresight at the same time, if you think about it. Sorry, not only we like vaccine, he likes PFD.
we have another pandemic, we should think long and hard whether mandates for vaccines are justified.
What an astonishing admission, what a wonderful political moment, what a valuable addition to the ever-growing case against the hostility, confidence, propaganda. Let's just for a moment remember, protect this thing, it's over. That's Rachel Maddow, Don Lemon. I think we should shame them. Joe Biden, take the vaccine back. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Where are we now? It's astonishing, isn't it, to see how much the world has changed. Now, one voice has been consistent in this period is the author of the new book, Deception, over 500 pages. But, well, I mean, he's been a presidential candidate before. Will he be again? Rand Paul is an American politician, served as the United States Senate. He's also the author of the newly released book, Deception, The Great Urban Cover-Up. There's a link to it in the description. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation between me and the Senator. We recorded it yesterday, and both our Waitlist One, the community, joined us for that live. That's why it's really worth joining our community. You know how hard the government works to demonetize us. You know that none of their political options are ever going to be viable for a human being like you. We demand your individual sovereignty. We demand your commitment to freedom. I don't want to tell you what to do. We're not interested in telling anyone else what to do. We're interested in new politics. This is the kind of conversation we want to have. If you want to join these conversations, click the link in the description. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're only going to be available for a few more minutes before it being exclusively available on Rumble. But do consider, it is within your means, supporting us and, of course, supporting our partners. You might think that I'm saying the word senator too much or saying the word sir too much, but remember, I'm English and Carlson on it. I'm English and he's from the South, so manners must come to the forefront. I hope I did a good job. Let me know. I know you will let me know in the Rumble chat. I know you will wait a month to let me know as well. Here's my conversation with Rand Paul. We're only going to be on YouTube for a moment, so get over onto Rumble. There's a link in the description and join us there. Here's Senator Rand Paul. We'll have a conversation. Senator Rand Paul, thank you so much for joining me today on Stay Free for us to Brad.
Glad to be with you. I heard it's a really big program to be on, so everybody wants to get on the show.
It is a significant cultural artifact. We regularly have outspoken members of a worldwide resistance movement, of which you have become a significant voice. And now with your book, Deception, in over 500 pages, you have articulated what many people have felt. In fact, due in no small part to your own investigations since the outset of the pandemic, that we've been subject to an unprecedented global deceit, and that Anthony Fauci plays a central and key role in orchestrating this deceit. What primarily is it that you want us to understand from this book about Anthony Fauci's role in the pandemic and its cover-up?
I think we've never had a cover-up where the proof of the cover-up and the proof of the deceit, the proof of the lying is so obvious in the words of the people committing the cover-up. So we had Anthony Fauci and all these virologists publicly say, you're crazy if you think this came from the lab. It absolutely came from animals. But you have them in private explicitly saying the opposite, not just hedging their bet, but absolutely saying, wow, this is no conspiracy theory. This looks like the most likely thing. Some of these scientists were saying, I'm 60-40, it came from the lab, or I'm 80-20, or I'm 50-50. But in public, they were saying, absolutely no way it came from the lab. So it was a dishonesty on a level that was never ever been able to prove by actually seeing in their own words how diabolically dishonest they were.
I'm going to pause the conversation with the Senator Randall. Senator, I love you! Because we've got to come off YouTube now, so click the link in the description and join us on Rumble. Remember, if you become a member of our community, you'll get all sorts of additional content, like, for example, the opportunity to join us for stuff like that, my analysis of the Amy Winehouse film and the way the media treated her in the period leading up to her death. Sometimes we do content on Terence McKenna, sometimes we go deep on conspiracy theories. How many people do the Clintons know that suddenly and without reason, finish that sentence, if you want to see videos like that, become a supporter, click the red button and join our local Operation Wonder community. Right, we're off YouTube now.
What the fuck?
This trick to get gas for a penny is going to get banned in Canada. This ex-programmer got fired from his job at a German car manufacturer after exposing a software bug in the fuel management system of all cars built after 1996. Christian worked in the ecology department where his job was to make
And pose questions. We've also got a fantastic investigation into the relationship between Tucker Carlson, and Stewart, John Stewart. it's an interesting moment in our culture when Jon Stewart re-emerges when he's anti-establishment, anti-Dem to a degree, but still anti-Republican, anti-right the way that he always was. Is there something we can learn from the gaps between the two of them? Things they say, things they don't say, and how politics has changed and what these two figures represent. It's a good conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. Let me know in the chat who you side with more broadly politically. Is it Tucker or is it Jon Stewart? The first part of the show will be available on YouTube, then will be exclusively available on that sweet stream of freedom that we call Rumble. Remember to subscribe, then you can join us in this fantastic conversation with important political figures and journalists like Rand Paul or Vandana Shiva or Glenn Greenwald. We get great people. Bobby Kennedy's coming up soon. Now, before we get into our incredible content, the Rand Paul conversation, the brilliant Jon Stewart and Tucker spat and what that discourse reveals, is the pendulum swinging too far back in Australia? Can you remember a nation more committed to the pandemic than Australia? Maybe Canada. I mean, they went through it, didn't they, with their emergency acts and their bank account freezing. But remember, Australia, they did the internment camps. They'll always have that. It turns out now that Queensland's Supreme Court has found that its COVID-19 vaccine mandates for police and ambulance workers were unlawful. And also now, Chief Health Officer, what's his name, that guy? Chris Piat was on the thing a minute ago. We'll tell you in a second, I'm sure it's in the article. He has admitted his part in pushing vaccine mandates was dead wrong. So let me know in the chat right now, do you think that the whole narrative is unraveling? Now, given that we're still on YouTube, I'm going to tiptoe around this. I will be very elegant in my appraisal of these issues, but I want you to be very confident, particularly those of you in that Rumble stream. Not that I see you hold back when it comes to complex issues in the Middle East, religion, politics, culture. You go for it in there, you guys. Let's have a look at what's going on in Australia and has the pendulum swung too far in the other direction.
Well, Queensland Supreme Court has ruled that the COVID-19 vaccine mandate...
Speaking of notice, is that Australian news? Hey, man, all right, it's Australia. Yeah, let's have a bit of news. Just because we're doing news doesn't mean we can't also do some drugs and have some fun. Why don't we take our tops off while we do this? I mean, they taking the news seriously.
For emergency services were unlawful.
Here to explain this to their medical
It was unlawful. Oh, yeah.
expert, Dr. Nick Coatsworth.
There's Dr. Nick, he's gorgeous. I've seen him before, actually. He's good, this guy.
Morning to you. This is pretty extraordinary, isn't it? Can you walk us through the ruling?
Maybe sashay us through it or dance us through it. Express yourself through movement like we do on the Australian news.
It is extraordinary, Carl. Before I do that, I can't do this segment without acknowledging my own role in the system that promoted vaccine mandates.
Right, okay, is that someone connected to the pandemic admitting that they made a mistake? I don't think I'm going to take it. I'm going to cry. I'm having a literal Damascene moment here. Like, what? You're taking responsibility for your actions? Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, that you should take the vaccine and that we should all lock down. And in retrospect, looking at the data, that wasn't correct. Heretic, apostate. Like, it's not a religion, is it? You'll see in our conversation with Rand Paul later that there was a line to follow all the way through this pandemic period in integrity and science. The very words, in fact, or ideas, concepts that were being deployed against the vaccine hesitant, as they called them, and the very concept, science itself, that was being most subverted, i.e. it became an orthodoxy and an ideology that was highly politicized, rather than just the neutral, objective analysis of information. We look now to Australia, to our new risen king, who admits for the first time in the political sphere that they made a mistake.
A strong public view that those who choose not to get vaccinated needs to there needs to be some sort of incentive measures, obviously we take them, stick perhaps through the current programs.
They hit with a stick, oh mate, but then was not Saul the tax collector converted to Saul? So he's gone from, like, people don't want to take the vaccine, hit him with a stick, offer them the carrot, but even if it's a particularly hard carrot, you could use that as a stick. I've been hit by a carrot before, it was quite painful. So he's gone from saying to use physical coercion in order to get people vaccinated to a mea culpa, an acknowledgement that people are, and can you feel yourself beginning to heal? More healing than a lot of medications we're offering in the last few years, let me tell you.
Including no jab, no pay.
No jab, no pay. No jab, no job, no pay. Simple as that. I mean, I suppose at least he didn't go for the alliteration that left us spell and poetry, but he did still say no jab, no pay. But look, he's come right out there and admitted it.
Make that happen.
I think as a general principle, we could all agree that mandates have a time-limited role in a pandemic. The dispute and the question will be how long should that time be, and what is a reasonable level of community vaccination to achieve before we abandon mandates.
Dr. Nick Coatsworth, you're a hero to me. I look to you as an example, and I mean this in all sincerity. You make a mistake, you admit you made a mistake, you do your best to put it back. Not if you make a mistake, you lie about making a mistake, you make a bunch of laws about your mistake, you conceal your mistake, you conceal the information that people might give to reveal the mistake was made. This is the sort of stuff that Rand Paul will eat this up with a spoon as long as it's been well washed.
My view, not quite at the moment. I agree entirely that they're time limited.
You rightly point out, Nick, that you're a government official promoting vaccines during the pandemic. You're a big boy, you can defend yourself. Did you get that?
I surely knew. Sorry, you're a big boy. I mean, look at you. Would you mind actually standing up for a moment and seeing exactly what type of boy you are? Put the music back on. Put the music back on.
Well, I think certainly we didn't get it wrong promoting the vaccines, Carl, but
come on. There's a little further to go.
The mandates, yes, I think we did get that wrong. And I think you can say hindsight is 20/20, but Carl, hindsight gives us foresight. And if we
where's he going now? Hindsight is just foresight plus time, if you think about it. Sorry, it's not only like vaccine, it's like DMT.
we have another pandemic, we should think long and hard whether mandates for vaccines are justified.
What an astonishing admission, what a wonderful political moment, what a valuable addition to the ever-growing case against the hostility, confidence, propaganda. Let's just for a moment remember, protect this thing, it's over. That's Rachel Maddow, Don Lemon. I think we should shame them. Joe Biden, just take the vaccine back. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Where are we now? It's astonishing, isn't it, to see how much the world's changed. Now, one voice that's been consistent in this period is the author of the new book, Deception, over 500 pages, fantastic book. Potential, he's been a presidential candidate before. Will he be again? Rand Paul is an American politician serving as the United States Senator. He's also the author of the newly released book, Deception, the Great COVID Cover-Up. There's a link to it in the description. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation between me and the Senator. We recorded it yesterday, and those of you that are members of our Awakened Wonder community joined us for that live. That's why it's really worth joining our community. You know how hard the government work to demonetize us. You know that none of their political options are ever going to be viable for a human being like you. We demand your individual sovereignty. We demand your community freedom. I don't want to tell you what to do. We're not interested in telling anyone else what to do. We're interested in new politics. This is the kind of conversation we want to have. If you want to join us for these conversations, click the link in the description. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're only going to be available for a few more minutes before it being exclusively available on Rumble. But do consider it is within your means supporting us and, of course, supporting our partners. You might think that I'm saying the word senator too much or saying the word sir too much, but remember, I'm English and Gareth's not it. I'm English and he's from the South, so manners must come to the forefront. I hope I did a good job. Let me know. I know you will let me know in the Rumble chat. I know you Awakened Wonders will let me know as well. Here's my conversation with Rand Paul. We're only going to be on YouTube for a moment, so get over onto Rumble. There's a link in the description and join us there. Here's Senator Rand Paul for our conversation. Senator Rand Paul, thank you so much for joining me today on Stay Free with Russell Brand.
Glad to be with you. I heard it's a really big program to be on, so everybody wants to get on your show.
It is a significant cultural artifact. We regularly have outspoken members of a worldwide resistance movement, of which you have become a significant voice. And now with your book, Deception, in over 500 pages, you have articulated what many people have felt, in fact, due in no small part to your own investigations since the outset of the pandemic, that we've been subject to an unprecedented global deceit, and that Anthony Fauci plays a central and key role in orchestrating this deceit. What primarily is it that you want us to understand from this book about Anthony Fauci's role in the pandemic and its cover-up?
I think we've never had a cover-up where the proof of the cover-up and the proof of the deceit, the proof of the lying is so obvious in the words of the people committing the cover-up. So we had Anthony Fauci and all these virologists publicly saying, you're crazy if you think this came from the lab. It absolutely came from animals. But you have them in private explicitly saying the opposite. Not just hedging their bet, but absolutely saying, wow, this is no conspiracy theory. This looks like the most likely thing. Some of these scientists were saying, I'm 60-40, it came from the lab, or I'm 80-20, or I'm 50-50. But in public, they were saying, absolutely no way it came from the lab. So it was a dishonesty on a level that we've never, ever been able to prove by actually seeing in their own words how diabolically dishonest they were.
I'm going to pause the conversation with the Senator Ramble. Senator, I love you! Because we've got to come off YouTube now, so click the link in the description and join us on Rumble. Remember, if you become a member of our community, you'll get all sorts of additional content, like, for example, the opportunity to join us for stuff like that, my analysis of the Amy Winehouse film and the way the media treated her in the period leading up to her death. Sometimes we do content on Terence McKenna. Sometimes we go deep on conspiracy theories. How many people do the Clintons know that suddenly and without reason, finish that sentence. If you want to see videos like that, become a supporter, click the red button and join our Locals Awakened Wonder community. Right, we're off YouTube now. Yes, indeed. In fact, not only were they giving us deception through omission, but also deception through commission and deception through direct contradiction and the management of information. It demonstrated a level of duplicity that we've seldom seen in public life. I'm speaking in particular of Anthony Fauci's intervention of various agencies, including the CIA, the management in particular of what was known as the lab leak theory that increasingly seems like an undeniable truth. I wonder for a moment, if we may take this broader, Senator, what do you think it does to the soul of a nation, to the spirit and morale of a nation, when a deception of this scale is practiced, when we almost see in real time ideas that were dismissed as conspiracy theories, i.e. the gain-of-function research was dangerous, that dual purpose research was taking place, that potentially America was involved in the funding of the research in Wuhan through groups like Eco Health Alliance and DARPA, and perhaps the figure of Peter Daszak is an interesting one to comment on here. What do you think it does to America's spirit at a time where your country appears to be undergoing a great reckoning? What does an event like this do to the country's soul?
What we saw for about 3 years as these public health officials came before committees was that they kept blaming the right wing and saying, you're responsible for vaccine hesitancy, you're responsible for people distrusting their government. And I pointed right back at them and said, absolutely not, you're responsible because you've lied to the public, you've lost your credibility. And I don't think they ever truly grasped that. But in the end, it's amazing to me how smart people actually are, because the elitist point of view is that the common man is too stupid to take care of himself, too stupid to make his healthcare decisions. But interestingly with this, if you ask a poll of how many moms are vaccinating their 6 months old in the United States, it's like a handful. They're from the Act Blue Coalition or something, but they're not normal people. But very few people are vaccinating their kids because they see no reason. It's not a deadly disease for kids. And they have read about that there's a possibility that my kid could have a side effect from the vaccine, but there's not much possibility that my kid can get very sick from the disease. So I think the people have gotten smarter on this, but vaccine distrust and distrust of government has grown exponentially because of their dishonesty.
Indeed, we are seeing now what we commonly refer to as mainstream or legacy media. It seems to me, at least, an attempt to mitigate the unavoidable deluge of truth that they are now being confronted with. I know that now Pfizer and the CDC have participated in the funding of a broad study that at least begins to acknowledge pericarditis, myocarditis, as well as other conditions, and how many yellow card and adverse injuries there have been as a result of this extraordinary product. At the beginning of your over 500-page book, you talk about Li Wenliang, who died under what sound like suspicious circumstances in China around the outbreak of coronavirus. Could you tell me why you see Li Wenliang as a significant figure and what exactly their story encapsulates?
He was a 33-year-old ophthalmologist, so I was drawn to him because 30 years ago I was a young ophthalmologist like him. he saw these people dying from an unknown, a virus of unknown origin or a pneumonia of unknown origin. And so he decided he'd do what he thought that was the right thing. He would spread the word to fellow physicians that it looks like this is happening again. Most of these people remembered or knew about 2002, 2003, when SARS-1 came about. And so he was warning people, it's here again. But for that warning, the government arrested him.
What?
He was accused of spreading gossip. He was accused of spreading discord and ultimately of spreading misinformation. Before that, he was made to sign a confession. He was released only when he signed a public humiliation confession that he had done wrong to the state, and he was allowed to go. But then mysteriously he gets COVID. Maybe not mysterious that he got it. A lot of people were getting COVID. But the death rate for a healthy 33-year-old is about 4 out of 10,000. And it might have been higher in China. It's hard to know what to believe because they said no, almost nobody died in China. We do think millions of people died, even just in Wuhan. But it's extraordinary that he died, and I think there are always questions when people die in a totalitarian country because there's a lack of transparency all over Chinese Weibo, their email chat. All that night, people were going, we knew you'd do this. We knew this would happen in the middle of the night. And they're used to this. If you remember, the guy tried to stare down the Chinese tanks at Tiananmen Square. Nobody knows what happened to him this day. I think nobody really knows his name. So that's what's happened in China.
It seems like another extraordinary example of how we are being exposed to unexpected corollaries between Anglophonic nations such as ours and this previously presumed communist dictatorship. I wonder if the new ways of categorizing misinformation and malinformation, as well as the state's power to crush dissent through campaigns, as you just described in the instance of Li Wenliang, are becoming increasingly common here, as well as the undue and evidently misguided compliance that was able to be induced in populations of both your country and mine. What does this tell us about increasing authoritarianism and centralized power, Senator?
See, I think that's the point of this book in some ways, is that we kind of expect a totalitarian country to crush dissent. We expect them to weld people into apartments, but we don't expect the West, the liberalized West, to applaud it. You know, Anthony Fauci was quite proud of the Chinese, and many of the public health doctors in our country lamented the fact that we couldn't act like the Chinese because we had that, what's that terrible thing called? Oh yeah, the Bill of Rights. And so because of that, they couldn't do all the things they thought would be just great, you know, to shut down this disease. And I don't think any of those things work anyway. I don't think you can stop a virus. I think a virus is a virus no matter what you do. It pretty much goes on until you get immunity. And you get immunity through a couple of ways, naturally or through a vaccine. But until the vast majority has immunity, the virus spreads despite all things to stop it. But I do think that the story is that we began to act like these totalitarian countries. So the young ophthalmologist was arrested for spreading misinformation. That's exactly became the watchword of the left in our country and across Europe. You know, they began shutting down speech that gave a contrary opinion, and this is very, very dangerous. It's more dangerous than COVID. The loss or the shutting down of speech in the free countries of the world is more dangerous than the virus itself, and that still goes on to this day. The left that once stood up for the First Amendment in our country, some of them are the loudest saying, we're not doing enough. We have to get rid of this misinformation. And they have a lack of irony that it would be the responsibility of them to decide what is true. It's sort of like, oh, I'm a partisan Democrat, and I'm going to decide that what partisan Republicans are saying is not true. Who in their right mind would think that that is a way to have a full-throated debate? I would never, in my wildest dreams, think that I could shut a Democrat down or somebody I disagree with, because I believe in freedom of speech. But it's amazing that the opposite is not true. They are somehow so righteous and so sure of the truth, most of whom are not scientists, who know nothing about science, are so certain of the science that they're willing to shut down anyone's opinion they disagree with.
The politicization of this issue was, it seems, used to undergird a new orthodoxy that apparently always had as its aim the kind of authoritarianism that doesn't think twice about censoring and controlling information that is not advantageous to its previously concealed agenda. Within the figure of Anthony Fauci, who lived through a kind of live hagiography during this extraordinary period, we were able to see another curious aspect of American public life, the unelected bureaucrat consuming and demonstrating power at a level that is difficult to find a comparison for. He was given an extraordinary ride in the media, Anthony Fauci. I feel like I saw live song and dance numbers take place. People even, in fact, sexualizing Anthony Fauci at points, taking it.
Please, stop.
I have the footage. I wonder what you feel is the role of what has come to be termed the legacy media in creating this somewhat unaccountable hero, Anthony Fauci, who's now just admitted that the figure of a 6-foot separation we just pulled out of the air, that masks weren't effective, while previously having made the ludicrous claim that I am science. How did the media contribute to the creation of this figure?
So we just for fun, we occasionally write op-eds that we submit to either the New York Times or the Washington Post, because they always reject it. Every time they're rejected. We can't get anything published. So we sent over to them a comparison between J. Edgar Hoover and Anthony Fauci, because there are similarities. They both were in power about the same period of time, 40 some odd years. They both accumulated power at that time, and the power went to their head, and they had their own personal fiefdoms. This can happen whether you're FBI director or head of infectious disease. Now, you would have never thought the head of infectious disease would become so powerful. But, Bobby Kennedy's been pretty good at writing about this. He writes, and I think has drawn more attention to this than many people, is that a lot of this happened after 9/11. So after 9/11, there was a great deal of fear. We passed the Patriot Act, taking away civil liberties in our country, but we also ramp up our arms trade. And in our armamentarium is bioweapons. And we say, well, gosh, the enemy is making this, and the enemy is trying to take Ebola and spread it through the air. Well, we should too, so we can learn how to counteract it. And so everything is, an escalation. The same as there's a nuclear arms race, there's also a biological arms race that goes on. But what happened is Anthony Fauci was head of like 1/27th of all of NIH. His fiefdoms grew in dollars to come to dominate all of NIH. And it's one of the reasons why, in the end, nobody knew Francis Collins' name, and still don't, but they all knew Anthony Fauci's name. One, he was a TV hog, he loved the camera, but two, his budget dwarfed all the other budgets. And he also became somebody who routinely was visiting with his spoons. And this is one of the things that I learned in all these people granting scientific grants. You would think they're these just ivory-towered scientists who are like trying to cure disease for mankind. They're meeting with the CIA and the MI5 and the MI6 in England that was headed by Jeremy Farrar, who's a big player in all of this. He's talking to his boss at Welcome Trust. And oh, by the way, she's the former head of MI5. So it's like all these people are involved with science are also involved with intelligence, which really intelligence is a lot more going on here than they see.
Yes, it was Bobby Kennedy's analysis that first helped me to understand that there'd been a historic teleology from declared international wars which are identifiable, like the Second World War, to the subsequent Cold War, to the War on Terror, to the War on Germs and the War on Ideas, all used to, I suppose, through a kind of diffuse subterfuge, legitimize more and more authoritarian measures, even though the enemy is becoming harder and harder to quantify. Bobby Kennedy also, from a side note, says that you should succeed Mitch McConnell. He posted about that today. Is that something that you would consider?
Well, all I need is 25 votes. If someone can find me 25 reasonable Republicans, it's difficult. It's a club. It's a very small club. And if we have about 50, you got to have about 25. The reason McConnell has been able to stay in power is that he goes to the corporate heads, the CEO heads of all the big business. He gathers money, more money than you can put in the bag. It's like $300 million he gathers. And he had a couple billion at a time. And then this money goes to support candidates that vote for him within the caucus. And many of them are unable to raise money very well for themselves. They're not very well known in their communities, and they're deathly afraid of the voters. This is something people don't quite understand or isn't reported as much as it should be. Most of these incumbent senators are deathly afraid of their voters, including their own party. They go home to their own conventions and they're booed at their conventions. So the hardcore people who work in the political world, in the conventions of their state, they know these people aren't representing them. So I routinely will put forward things that I know that no good person in the state supports, and then we'll try to let people know how their senator voted because they have no idea.
This disjunct between the electorate and the institutions that nominally serve them has become increasingly exposed. One of the clear themes of the pandemic period was deep state intervention when it came to the matters of media and the control of information. It was Mike Benz that recently coined the term, which I think is interesting when people say democracy now, as in we must go to war in order to defend democracy. They mean a set of institutions that are owned by elite interests as opposed to the process of elections by which the will of the people might have been expressed. Do you feel that fissures have opened up during the pandemic period that are going to be very difficult to close? You've already mentioned that trust in science and trust in vaccines has fallen radically, and it seems to me that there's an attempt to try to address and redress that, or create systems of authority that don't require public complicity. Do you feel that there is a great mistrust in American public officials, in some part brought about by Anthony Fauci? And I like your comparison to Hoover because, Anthony Fauci liked dressing up in that mask that apparently did very little, and we know that Hoover had some interesting clandestine habits in that area also.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the thing I worry most about coming out of this is the idea that there's different standards of justice. One of the things that almost tore America apart back in the 50s and 60s was the idea that if your skin were black, you wouldn't be treated with equal protection under the law, that you were going to be treated differently according to your skin color. We have gotten past that to a great degree over many decades, but now my fear is that people are being treated differently based on the shade of their ideology, whether or what your beliefs are on vaccine, or who you follow politically, or whose podcast you listen to. Because Anthony Fauci is clearly guilty of lying to Congress about the gain of function, about funding gain of function research. He's guilty of lying in his own words, because we now have Slack emails from February 1st, 2020, when he says explicitly they're doing gain of function research. He lists the research, which is the research he had funded, and he says he knew they were doing it from the very beginning. From the first email, this is an amazing thing to discover on. The first email we have a record of is January 27, 2020. Fauci gets an email from his assistant. He said, wanted you to see this paper, this gain of function paper in Wuhan that we funded. That's the first email, January 27th. And then the rest of the time is Fauci publicly saying, nothing to see here, we never funded gain of function. But he never prosecuted, he won't be prosecuted. But people from the previous administration who either refused of lying or may have lied to Congress are still being prosecuted. People who came to the Capitol on January 6th but never entered, that were milling around looking like this and didn't do anything, are still being pursued for jail. But if you came here to protest Kavanaugh, about 100 women lay on the floor and wouldn't leave. They were trespassing in the Senate buildings, and they were moved, but they were taken. I don't know if any of them ever got a ticket, but none of them went to jail. If they were booked, they were let go. That's what typically happened to protesters in our country if you didn't hurt somebody. But that's not what's happening with January 6th. So people are worried that there's two standards of justice now, and that will lead to further problems. It may lead to strife in our country.
Certainly the judiciary has been weaponized in the manner that you've described, and perhaps in particular against Donald Trump. I wonder if with the recent decision to defer to the Supreme Court, it's likely now that the Democrats will ramp up the hysteria around this issue rather than, as many have suggested, undertaking a deep reckoning about the inability of their party to appeal at this point even to their own voters. Do you feel that there are crises now in American political life that are unprecedented, that regardless of the outcome of the next election, America may never again heal, that secession becomes a realistic possibility, that the assumption that the nation of America, the United States in its current form is permanent is starting to be exposed for the illusion that we know that all temporal conditions ultimately are.
You know, I never used to think it would be possible that a state legislature could change the rules on the statute of limitations and a woman from 30 years ago could accuse him of something. He said, she said things are very difficult. Who do you believe, one side or the other, particularly the longer you are away from what may or may not have happened. But this was beyond the statute of limitations. There was no legal way for her to bring this forward. They changed the law. She brings it forward. She says she remembers it distinctly because she's wearing a certain jacket that was made 10 years after she said she was attacked. Nothing about what she says fits very well, and he denies it. And there is no proof. And you're going to give her $80 million? I mean, that's ridiculous. Then they sue him for, maybe his estimates on his buildings weren't proper. But the banks didn't sue him, and he paid them all back, and there is no grieving party. This is a weaponization we have never, ever seen before. But it's going to destroy New York. New York's already got an excess of wealthy people. Do you think anybody's going to want to do business with the chance that an old girlfriend could call from 30 years ago and get $80 million from them? Wow. And it's done because they hate Donald Trump. It's not going to be done if you are somehow a follower of Democrat politics. It's going to be done if they hate your politics. But that's a real problem. The only way it gets solved in a way that doesn't lead to further problems would be the Supreme Court take all of these cases and simply say we're not going to use our courts to go after politicians. We're not a banana republic. We're not going to act like it. And all of these are washed. I don't know legally whether they can take them all up, but I would assume they're going to try to get the Supreme Court. If they all do, the Supreme Court does that, they could essentially wash the slate on this. But if he's forced out of business or forced into bankruptcy because of this, $3 billion is not chump change. He's got to come up with all of the interest. It adds up to $400 or $500 million by the time you get the interest going, and it's just fatally unfair. So, but I think it's also getting the public more to his side. I mean, nobody could touch him in the primary after he was indicted. Now he looks like he's running ahead in battleground states, despite not always, saying the appropriate thing or even the best thing. He's now running ahead in battleground states because people think he's being treated unfairly.
I think it's oddly comparable to the point you made about vaccine uptakes in medicines that are not related to the pandemic, i.e. ordinary childhood vaccines. The trust in the establishment and its institutions is so low that a figure that epitomizes anti-establishment sentiment and perhaps even more deeply the emotions that undergird that will increase in popularity the more he is attacked by the establishment, given that it's unlikely that the Democrat Party have any other weapon to deploy other than this judicial artillery, because to address the problems, if you want to regard it from this perspective, that led to the rise of Trump, i.e. inequality, corruption, the donor class, corporatization of America, the globalization of US politics, the necessity for forever wars, because these issues cannot be touched and cannot be dealt with, this ongoing judicial process, I suppose, is the only option. Given that that I imagine, Senator, that you're a man who has some contretemps and distinctions even within your own party, do you see the rise of figures like Donald Trump and perhaps yet more specifically Robert Kennedy as an appetite for more independent political movements? And do you see that there could be a future in which America was not the bipartisan or some would say uni-party institution that it currently is?
You're seeing the term more and more on the internet, but you're also seeing it used by many of us who are rebelling against the leadership of the Senate, calling it the uni party. I can remember even back when I was a kid, I would come up as a child, as an intern, and work in my dad's office, and he always commented at the top of the committee, Republican or Democrat were the same. There was only differences as you worked your way down the committee to newer members. As they rose up the ranks, they became the same. There really was not a dime for the difference between both parties. It's still to a large degree that way, particularly on foreign policy, on believing this old Cold War mentality that we have to, Ukraine, if Ukraine falls, Poland falls, and the dominoes will fall, and Russia will be in England, and Russia will be on our shores, and nonsense, because Russia can't even take over Ukraine. They don't seem to have the ability to even conquer a smaller country next to them. But the thing is that mentality is in both parties. They're the ones who want to send unlimited money to Ukraine. They're the Republicans who say, well, we're fiscally conservative, except for when it comes to military might and military intervention around the world, which means they're not really fiscally conservative. And I tried that line when I ran for president in 2016. I said, look, none of these guys are fiscally conservative. You can't be fiscally conservative unless you're willing to save money both on the welfare front and the warfare front. It doesn't mean we eliminate either one of them, but you got to save money on both fronts. Instead, we do the opposite, and the compromise, there's always a compromise. There'll be a compromise this week, today, and next week. We'll spend more money on warfare and welfare, and then we'll send some to Ukraine, some to Taiwan, and all go out the door, but it'll all be borrowed. It will be another $1.5 trillion in debt, further in debt in 1 year.
In your excellent book, Deception, you quote the poet Parveen Shakir, who uses the image of fireflies being caught in daylight as the way in which what is currently called the censorship industrial complex are able to manage information, to conceal truths, to manage wars in the manner that you've just described as necessary, fundamental, using inaccurate, anachronistic historical analogy in order to reframe conflicts that bear no real comparison to the conflicts of the last century. This incredible ability that the establishment, for want of a better term, has to control our spaces of reality surely needs to be interrupted. Do you believe that we have a significant problem when it comes to censorship right now? In particular, during the pandemic, it was acknowledged that true information was censored, legitimate science was controlled. Is the Barrington Declaration, is that the right one? Is that the thing that Jay Bhattacharya did? I wonder if what you consider to be the power of the state to use proxies to crush dissenting voices, what a problem that is. I've certainly experienced it myself, as a matter of fact, and I wonder what your view of that matter is.
I do worry about the government's involvement with big tech and with social media platforms. Throughout all of this, we've discovered that the FBI and Homeland Security are meeting weekly with all of the major tech platforms and coercing and pushing and cajoling them to take down information. That, I think, goes against our First Amendment, and I have a bill to make that illegal. I would prevent any government employee from meeting with anybody from the media to discuss removing constitutionally protected speech.
Yeah.
The reason we write it that way is there are some speech they claim would be in danger or insightful. They'll still be allowed to talk about that. There are things that are criminal. They should be allowed to talk to the media about things that are criminal on their platform. But whether or not you think a mask works is an opinion, and it's to be based on science, but it has something the government should have no viewpoint in that and should have no power in suppressing it. So I have a bill to do that, but I can't get a Democrat on board. I've tried talking to the couple of Democrats who I think are reasonable, and one of them said this to me. He said, well, we have to be able to police disinformation. And what if the Republicans tell everybody that the election's on Wednesday instead of on Tuesday? And I kind of thought this to myself. I didn't tell him. I said, well, gosh, if people are that stupid, maybe they shouldn't vote. But I didn't say that. But that's what their worry is. They think the government, that people are too stupid and that they would actually not vote, or, text in the name of your candidate, and that'll be your vote. Nobody believes that. I mean, if anybody is that moronic, really, do they need to be voting? But I don't think it really works. But they're so alarmed that we need the government to prevent people from suppressing the vote by telling them dishonest nonsense on the internet. People are way too smart for that. People know how to vote. We got all kinds of mechanisms to tell people how to vote is. But no Democrat will sign on to this. They think it's okay for the FBI and Homeland Security. They didn't used to think that was right. I mean, in the 50s and 60s and maybe 70s, the left were the protectors of the First Amendment. The right wasn't very good. And now the left doesn't seem to care at all. They want more government. They want more censorship. They worry that there's too much disinformation out there.
It's this assumption of our collective and indeed individual stupidity that I find most offensive, the idea of government intervention between information and us as its recipients, that I find most offensive. So if I may pass a question from our audience, we have a small audience watching us live now of our supporters. May I pass on one of their questions? Is that okay? May I pass on?
Oh, yeah, sure. I didn't know you were asking me. I thought I was going to hear the question.
I was asking politely. I detect from your accent that you're a gentleman of the South. I'm an Englishman. This is a forum where manners must come to the very forefront. The question is, from @Karina14. As more and more evidence emerges that health agencies on a global scale misled and most likely harmed many people, what kind of actual accountability can there be given the scale of the offence?
You're talking about harm from the vaccine?
Yes, sir.
This has been a discussion for a long period of time, and we discussed this in the book. Congress gave liability protection, so there is no harm to be held to. They can serve up whatever you want. It'd be bad enough if it were voluntary, but it's being pushed on you. Many people lose their jobs if they're not vaccinated, but if they're harmed by the vaccine, they have no recourse. And they set up some big vaccine database and then an ability to get some money from the government. But it's not the same because it doesn't chasten at all the companies. And really, the insidious part of this is that it's mandatory. And then you got a former FDA commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, who's on the board of Pfizer, who is then calling Twitter to say, take down this article saying you might be harmed by vaccinating your children. That's how bad it is. And that the former FDA commissioner now on the board of Pfizer is now telling Twitter to take down information on this. So it's disturbing. It has been going on since the 1970s. My dad fought against, one of the few people to vote against giving liability protection to the vaccine manufacturers.
Really?
And on the other side of it, they would argue, well, the government mandates these things. Why should people sue us? We're not mandating them. The government's mandating them. So the government should be responsible for it. But if they're not responsible for their own products, I don't think they're going to work as hard to try to do no harm, to make sure that there's not a harmful aspect. And these things were pushed out so fast. If they'd been voluntary in every aspect, you could at least say people who were frightened could take them, people at high risk could take them, but they were pushed out and then pushed on healthy people who didn't need the vaccines. And that really is a crime, and somebody should be punished, particularly the government. The Anthony Fauci's of this world who pushed nonsense and bad science on us, but now he just throws up his hands and says, oh, well, we didn't really know. We liked 6 feet, but we didn't really know why we said 6 feet in distance. There was no science. But on the children, I've gone directly at Anthony Fauci on the vaccine for children and said, does it reduce transmission? No. Does it reduce hospitalization or death? And he says, well, we don't know. And I say, well, the reason you don't know is that no child is going to the hospital or dying right now. No healthy child. There are exceptions to every rule, but no healthy child with no significant disease is going to the hospital and dying from COVID. It's not a deadly disease for healthy children. If your child has an illness, you talk to your doctor and you can make your own decision. But the vaccine isn't doing anything for healthy children. It's all doing for the bottom line of Big Pharma. So Anthony Fauci and Bill have basically become salesmen for Big Pharma. And this is sort of a tragedy of crony capitalism. And I think we have to keep fighting it.
Thank you very much.
I think I'm getting the roundup. I got unfortunately go to the floor.
Good luck out there. Thank you very much for representing. Thanks for being one of the few people I've asked significant and important questions to people that should be held accountable. I'm grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, Brad Paul, for joining us on Stay Free. Remember, you can get that book, Conception of the Great COVID Cover-Up, by clicking the link in your description right now. Hopefully, they'll be able to track how many of these dollars are adults here so we can increase our prominence in the space. Now, listen, Tucker Carlson called Jon Stewart a tool of the regime in response to Jon Stewart's bit criticising Tucker's Vladimir Putin interview. Is the media missing vital viewpoints from both men in its appetite to create its latest polarised battle in the culture war? Of course it is. Oh, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. Here's the news. No, here's the effing news. Tucker Carlson has called Jon Stewart a tool of the establishment, where Jon Stewart thinks that Tucker is just, well, a tool. But in this phony polarisation and culture war, are we missing the real message here? That both these anti-establishment figures have more to teach us than anyone from the homogenised uni-party authoritarian centre. Surely this is an important moment where a figure like Tucker Carlson, despised and loathed on the left, but adored by many, and Tucker Carlson, let me say it outright, out front, I consider him to be my friend. And the reason I like Tucker Carlson is because I think he's like an old school conservative, maybe, who is willing to just come out and say, I'm a free speech absolutist, I'm absolutely against war. He's come on our shows, he's been clear and open. I don't expect to disagree with anybody on a variety of political subjects, but with Tucker Carlson, I think he has good values and good good principles. That is not what Jon Stewart thinks, though. He thinks that Tucker Carlson ought to be a pariah. I've heard him say that Tucker Carlson is deliberately evil, and on his return to The Daily Show, he's made Tucker Carlson one of his targets, and that makes sense when you understand the old rubric of left versus right. But I think politics has changed since Jon Stewart was last on television. Let's be clear here. Jon Stewart is an excellent comedian. Excellent. He understands comedy. He understands delivery. He understands character. He's an exceptionally gifted comic, and I think a vital, incredible voice in our cultural space. That's why I think it's fascinating to see the two of them at loggerhead. But are we going to miss a real opportunity here when Tucker Carlson is a figure of the right, let's say, for simplicity's sake, who is virulently anti-establishment? Jon Stewart is a figure of the left who is very pro-ordinary working people, who is critical of the establishment, and yet is confined to certain areas of topicality, and we'll point them out as we go. But is there more to learn from both of these figures, their popularity and their ability, than we could ever learn from the centralized, homogenized, authoritarian, centralist figures that dominate our cultural space these days? I.e., Jon Stewart is wit, funny, fast, amusing, and right on. Tucker Carlson understands how to reach a wide audience with ethics and morals that clearly resonate with vast and almost incomparable numbers of people. And does it show us in a way that politics and media have changed since Jon Stewart was last on TV? And if we were to find an energy and a charge between these two poles rather than repulsion, in that magnetic power, we might find the source of new political movements that could be a genuine challenge to the American war machine and global corporatism. Let's get into it.
Just out of curiosity, as a student,
Firstly, how Jon Stewart did this was well funny. He sets up the bit that he's like learning from Tucker Carlson as a journalist, and I lie about what you do. He did this in a very, very amusing and brilliant way. But as someone who does this kind of thing for a living, when I see Jon Stewart do it, I think, wow, that guy is really good at this. They turn these ideas around fast. They find the comedy in the ideas. But what I'm interested in is why Jon Stewart never points out that Tucker Carlson is consistently anti-war. Watching Jon Stewart deconstruct and attack Tucker Carlson on the basis of his interview with Putin is interesting, but I also would argue this was a really important interview, and that in attacking Tucker Carlson, even though he does it brilliantly and amusingly, he is, to a degree, doing the job of the establishment. Because if the Democrat Party could press a button to prevent that interview from happening, they would have pressed that button, because I think millions of people who never would have had access to it before saw Vladimir Putin clearly conveying a very particular perspective, which could be called easily propaganda, but certainly inclusive like, we are interested in a diplomatic solution. We always made it clear that if Ukraine joined NATO, it would be a problem. And not only that, these are things that we were all aware of and discussing prior to the interview, the 2014 coup in Ukraine and the way that's played out. And subsequently, even newspapers like the New York Times have published that the CIA have bases inside Ukraine and have been agitating and provoking a war. So you can't call it an unprovoked war anymore. So what I'm saying is, I wonder, is it possible that you could feel, as Jon Stewart does, a kind of antipathy and even disdain for Tucker Carlson, and yet acknowledge Tucker Carlson's right, and therefore his audience's right, to share the views that they clearly do, and to oppose the opinions of Jon Stewart, but find common ground when it comes to a general agreement that you can't trust the American military-industrial complex, a subject upon which Tucker Carlson is very strong, and to which this interview is integrally related, because isn't the big establishment fear here say stuff that makes us not want to fund an ongoing Ukraine-Russia war? And haven't you already heard a bunch of stuff that makes you think that diplomacy might be better than continuing to allow Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, etc., all to profit from that ongoing war?
when you're sitting there interviewing Putin and you don't plan to challenge his other bullshit, but you don't want to really be that obvious, what's your face? Oh, I see. Okay, so it's not really a straight face as much as you try to convey a mixture of what appears to be shame, arousal, and I'm going to say irregularity. For instance, like you're constipated while jerking off to a Sears catalog.
This, I suppose, shows you the power of comedy, because it's an entirely constructed idea designed to ridicule, and it's a successful one, and it's the kind of thing that comedians should be able to do, and clearly do rather well. And it's one of the things that's slowly getting extricated from our culture, the ability to be cruel in good faith. Although this is, of course, not a well-intended bit, this is a polarizing bit. I maintain Jon Stewart is an anti-establishment figure when it comes to being critical of corruption. Did you see his interview with that Pentagon official when it came to the subject of failing audits?
An $850 billion budget to an organization that can't pass an audit and tell you where that money went. I think most people would consider that somewhere in the realm of waste, fraud, or abuse, because they would wonder why that money isn't well accounted for.
What I'm trying to drive us towards here is the possibility of a kind of acceptance that there's a space that's neither Democrat or Republican in the former sense, but is a more decentralized, autonomous, truly democratic, anti-establishment position. Could it ever emerge? There we go.
So I guess you put in 10 rubles here, and you get it back when you put the cart back.
Now, possibly with his well-intentioned and enthusiastic appraisal of Russian supermarkets, Tucker may not have done himself any favors.
So it's free, but there's an incentive to return it and not just bring it to your homeless encampment.
I didn't realize America's homeless problem was caused entirely by easy access to grocery. I had all my stuff in my house, but I didn't have to put it on wheels. It's so much easier.
But it's not actually, because what is causing America's homeless crisis? Lack of infrastructure, lack of support, and where are those resources currently going? Evidently, to the Pentagon, to the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia, the Middle Eastern wars are escalating. So I suppose what I'm inviting is a spirit of conviviality, mutual acceptance, trust, and even love. Even though I adore comedy, I adore ridicule, I adore the ability to poke fun and even attack in good spirits. And both of these men are, in the case of Tucker Carlson, a person I consider a friend, in the case of Jon Stewart, a person I admire. But in terms of how is this playing out in the media, how is this playing out in the culture, and isn't it possible that what we're missing here in this polarity is the opportunity to identify, ignore new cultural spaces rather than let this just sink into the morass of the culture war of spats that don't really go anywhere?
Perhaps if your handlers had allowed, you would have seen there was a hidden fee to your cheap groceries and orderly streets. Ask Alexei Navalny or any of his supporters.
In Vladimir Putin's Russia, political repression is everywhere. And hundreds have been arrested for daring to honor Navalny so publicly.
Right. This is a point where you have to question the legitimacy and editorialization that's happening literally in that moment. It would be a perfect opportunity, one might say, for Julian Assange's name to come to the forefront of this show's mind. Julian Assange was in prison, awaiting potential extradition to the United States for journalism. And now we, of course, are beginning to understand that it's likely that Navalny died of blood clot.
Because the difference between our urinal-caked, chaotic subways and your candelabra, beautiful subways, is the literal price of freedom.
But also the literal price of freedom is America's ongoing imperialist projects around the world, the escalating tensions in the Middle East, some people are calling it a genocide in Gaza, the increasing tensions in the South Pacific between China, and the agitation of Russia that's been continually framed by the media that I'd love to see Jon Stewart hold to account in the same way, continually advocate for as an unprovoked attack that needed addressing, when increasingly we now know from New York Times reporting that the CIA had bases in Ukraine for 10 years and were agitating for that war. And we know that NATO also understood that if Ukraine were ever to be granted membership of that organization, it would lead to an escalation of tensions between Ukraine and Putin. So when it comes to imperialism, colonialism, and the management of information, the establishment, the neoliberal left establishment, because it might be there is no left anymore, have a lot of questions to answer as well. And I think that as long as you have Tucker Carlson, who I believe is much more critical of both parties than Jon Stewart, who still appears to be somewhat tribally affiliated with the Democrat organization, despite being willing to criticize Biden, and there was a hell of a lot of blowback when he did, even on something as risible as his age. If Jon Stewart were to apply his comedic wit and incredible abilities to addressing the hypocrisy within the Democratic Party, I think it would relieve a great deal of tension. I know I felt excited just by seeing Jon Stewart attack Joe Biden and attacking Donald Trump. I felt like, yeah, this is what I want to hear. This is what I need to hear now. My satisfaction scarcely needs to be prioritized. But I think that what is being revealed by these two cultural orators, two polemicists, two polarized figures, is that the uni-party space is becoming increasingly increasingly less relevant, and movements and individuals from the periphery have a lot more in common with one another ultimately, even if there is a variety of cultural issues that may separate us. And I figure that if you were to acknowledge that on the subject of war, the military, the industrial complex, deep state involvement, the establishment of a censorship industrial complex, all of which has been underwritten by both the Obama administration and the Biden administration, all of which Tucker has reported on extensively, if we were to see those issues discussed in these spaces, we would start to recognize, hang on a minute, there is an affinity here. But you don't tend to see those issues discussed. Why? Because it seems to me that the establishment's primary weapon now in maintaining control of political institutions is to continue to portray Trump as a terrifying tyrant and dictator in waiting, hysterically, rather than ever addressing the failures of their own organisation and their own party, particularly when it comes to economic inequality. Jon Stewart is a figure of the left that I continue to admire precisely because he does reach out to what you might call ordinary Americans. His work with the first responders after 9/11 and his affinity with ordinary American people is one of the things, I know, let me know how you put in the chat, that makes me still feel affection for Jon Stewart and makes me still feel hope that out of this incendiary space and this type of cultural conflict, new alliances may yet emerge.
But the goal that Carlson and his ilk are pushing is that there's really no difference between our systems. In fact, theirs might be a little bit better. The question is, why? Why is Tucker doing this? Here's why. It's because the old civil
metropolitan elite and have abandoned ordinary working people and therefore have to emphasize the cultural areas where they are more inverted commas progressive in order to distract us from the fact that now truckers are pro-Trump. To regard Trump as the source of the problem rather than a response to the failings of the American left is, I think, a similarly myopic perspective, and also conveying a kind of going like live in Russia if you love it so much. That's exactly the sort of thing that you would have heard from Bill O'Reilly just 10 years ago. And again, John Stewart spats with Bill O'Reilly. There was a kind of conviviality and a sense of hope that somehow there was a shared vision of America that might lead to mutuality, respect and trust. That kind of conversation seems to be disappearing from the public discourse.
And in that fight, Putin is an ally to the right. He's their friend. Unfortunately, he is also a brutal and ruthless dictator. So now they have to make Americans a little more comfortable with that. And liberty is nice, but have you seen Russia's shopping carts?
I suppose at this point you have to estimate for yourself how much of the United States military-industrial complex and your tax dollar resources are being expended in the Ukraine-Russia conflict because of a humanitarian crisis, and how much of it is being expended because, as Julian Assange said, the goal is to create long, unending wars rather than successful ones.
You mentioned Jon Stewart. The two of you have a bit of a history. I don't know if you've seen it, but he kind of grilled your supermarket and Subway videos. But his other point was that I was somehow a partisan or a mindless partisan. Definitely not true. I mean, it is true of him. He is a mindless partisan. I really haven't been since I got back from Baghdad at the war, and I realized that the Republican Party, which I voted for, my whole life to that point and had supported in general, I was like pushing this really horrible thing that was going to hurt the United States, which in time it really did.
I'm a figure that came out of what you might call the cultural left. I've got a lot of friends that feel much more affiliated with the politics and ideals of Jon Stewart than Tucker Carlson. One of the things they continue to say about Tucker Carlson is his interest in things like displacement theory. I've never heard a talk about Tucker Carlson's continuing opposition to war, from the Iraq War to contemporary wars. His willingness to interview people that are truly anti-establishment on a variety of subjects, and even a memorable piece where he spoke to Ben Shapiro, those were the days when them guys were communicating, on the subject of AI and whether or not he would pass laws to ensure that trucks could never be driven, for example, automatically because of the impact that would have on that particular sector of American working people, where he spoke in favour of government regulation of private corporations in a way that you would never hear anyone from inside the Biden administration talking in support of ordinary workers.
Would you, Tucker Carlson, be in favor of restrictions on the ability of trucking companies to use this sort of technology specifically to, sort of artificially maintain the number of jobs that are available in the trucking industry?
Are you joking?
In a second. In other words, if I were president, when I say the DOT, the Department of
Ben Shapiro was so unbelievably in the closet. Like, he's obsessed with gay people.
Transportation, we're not letting driverless trucks unload, period. Why? Really simple. Driving for a living is the single most common job for high school educated men in this country, in all 50 states.
The problem, I suppose, is I generally find more affinity with people that say this system is broken, these institutions are not worthy of our trust, we need new political models, you can't trust the government, you can't trust corporations. The people that appear to be advocating for one side of a broken political system. For me, by continually being hysterical about Trump and Trump's impact, you're failing to acknowledge that the Democrats in your country or the Labour movement in our party have failed ordinary people to the point where populism, nativism are inevitable reactions to the rise of globalism that makes many people feel there is a global agenda, there is a cartel of interests and institutions that are impervious to the democratic will of ordinary people. And for me, Tucker Carlson has been brilliant at attacking and addressing exactly those subjects.
But I would just say this, Jon Stewart's a defender of power. Like, Jon Stewart has never criticized. Like, what's Jon Stewart's view on, the aid we've sent to Ukraine, the $100 billion or whatever? Like, what happened to that money? What happened to the weapons that have fallen? He doesn't care. He has the exact same priorities as the people permanently in charge in Washington.
We can't make this content without the support of our fantastic partners. I'm particularly proud of these partners, Charlize. What a magnificent organisation they are, of radicals who care about looking after your skin without toxins. Have a look, stay for it. Look at this glorious apple. Why, it's like the fruit of Eden. Indeed, it is the fruit of Eden. You can see why Snow White would be tempted by this glorious piece of fruit. On the other hand, the lowly banana decaying slowly, rotting before our eyes. The reason for that is apple stem cells, a technology that was utilized by Swiss scientists in a glorious experiment that showed that apple stem cells are effective in improving human beauty. Now, our sponsor today, Charlize, uses a toner that deploys apple stem cells to rejuvenate your skin. Oh, in much the same, that's just actually glorious. I feel better already. Not only does it make your skin feel better, it's boosting me with serotonin. If I was a little less responsible, I'd be drinking this because you couldn't drink it, you shouldn't drink it, but you could drink it because it's completely toxic free. It fights the signs of aging using the apple stem cells. Just one spray, it floods your whole face, you'll look and feel magnificent. Me and my wife are using this together, our marriage is improving. Yes, our skin's looking great, I hope you agree. And the serotonin is sending us through the roof. Many of Charlize's products smell beautiful, they're all natural, they're completely toxic free. The orange citrus essence perfume is fantastic. There's a link in the description that will allow you to get 25% off by going to charlize.beauty and using the promo code BRAND. It's a simple choice really. This glorious apple or this droopy old shoppy banana. That's charlize.beauty promo code BRAND. Me and the family are using it and we've nearly felt better. Let's get back to the story.
If you're going to pretend to be the guy who's giving the finger to entrenched power, you should do it once in a while. And he never has. There's not one time that he said something that was deeply unpopular on one show. That's all I'm saying. And so don't call yourself a truth teller. You're a court comedian or a flatterer of power. Okay, that's fine. There's a role for that. But don't pretend it's something else.
What I'm struck by when watching these two figures communicating presumably primarily to their own audiences rather than each other's is surely at this point there is a growing constituency that quite like Jon Stewart, quite like Tucker Carlson, and hate the establishment, hate the Unity Party. That's what I think is being exposed by this era and by the great stars of this era, is that the establishment and its institutions are failing. In fact, they're over. And what we're living through now is their frantic attempt to reassert control that used to be possible and plausible when you had centralized media. Welcome to NBC, welcome to CNN. Now you don't have that. You have me, you have Tucker Carlson, you have Joe Rogan, you have all sorts of people. And back into that space, you have one of these, not old guard, I mean this in a dismissive way, a very, very brilliant comic who could succeed in any environment because of his skill adapting to what has changed since then, because I feel, and I hope in a way, that there are more of us that think, not the Democrats, not the Republicans, something else, please, than are just like thirstily and happily backing up our chosen opponent in a culture war that done all of us a great disservice. Because guess what? While we're culture warring and clapping and applauding our preferred pugilist in this phony battle, the establishment is business as usual. And business as usual is ongoing war. And it's this subject, beyond all others, that led me to understand that what Tucker Carlson is doing is significant and important.
The measure to me is, are you taking positions that are unpopular with the most powerful people in the world, and how often are you doing it? It's super simple, not for its own sake, but do you feel free enough to say, to the consensus, I disagree? And if you don't, then you're just another toady. That's fine. Well, I think he probably feels free enough to do it, what you're saying.
Yeah.
On the big things, look, the big things, this is my estimation of it, others may disagree. The big things are the economy and the war, okay? The big things government does can be, a lot of things government does. Government does everything at this point, but where we kill people and how and for what purpose and how we organize the economic engine that keeps the country afloat, those are the two big questions. And I hear almost no debate about either one of them in the media. And I have dissenting views on both of them. I'm mad about the tax code, which I think is unfair. And the fact that we're creating chaos around the world, like, it's the saddest thing that's happening right now. And nobody feels free to say that. So it's not good.
These are valuable questions to ask about the establishment media. Are they willing to interrogate war expenditure? Are they willing to interrogate and provide the reckoning that the pandemic period surely demands, the errors that were made? It was, in fact, let's not forget John Stewart, who was the first significant mainstream figure who said there's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness in Pennsylvania with regard to the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the ridiculous coincidence of the emergence of coronavirus from that period.
The disease is the same name as the lab. There's been an outbreak of this near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Like, I maybe a steam shovel made it with a cocoa bean. Or it's the chocolate factory.
So what I'm saying is our culture needs both of these figures. It represents the end of these systems. Is it possible that we have in the figures of Carlson and John Stewart, even while they're in the middle of a highly publicised spat, the kind of fusion that's required for a solution? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Is this conversation and this polemic an indication that our old institutions are dying, new institutions are required, new conversations will have to take place in order for that to be achieved, and perhaps a conversation between John Stewart and Tucker Carlson would certainly contribute to that solution. But that's just my thing. Let me know what you think in the chat. See you in a second. Hope you enjoyed that conversation, and thank you so much for joining us. Guess who we got on the show next week? You're going to love this. Mike Benz is with us. If you want to participate and ask questions directly to Mike Benz, but come and awaken wonder. Mike Benz is the person who said, when they say they're protecting democracy, they mean now a set of institutions, not the process of electoral democracy. We know that Google can manipulate elections. We know that Ukraine don't hold elections, and yet you're having Mike Benz is extremely valuable. We are growing this movement. We are moving forward. We demand freedom from debt. We demand freedom from tax. We demand freedom from stock. Joining us are Rusty Meatwagon, Disgusting, Patrick E. J. Breeze 57. Sign me up, please. And Red Calicat. They are all aboard with us. Join us, guys, next week, not for more of those. Look to that club, but for more of different events. You can stay free.
Okay. Okay, Rod. Poor boy. There you go, Bubby. Don't fall over. No, no, no. Oh. Oh, there's Shirley. What the fuck? What do you have? Is that an entire bagel? Come on, Ron. Come on, Ron. Poor kid. Let me see what I can call him. Come in. Oh.
Use Grammarly to handle a tight deadline.
Yes, I will follow the CEO's ruler.
Justin Trudeau's new online harms bill is the biggest threat to freedom of speech in this country. It introduces nothing short of a surveillance state, complete with snitch lines, kangaroo courts, and mass censorship. But rather than sounding the alarm bell, the legacy media in Canada is doing the Prime Minister's dirty work and smearing the opposition. It's Fake News Friday. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Canadian. Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to head over to our website, www.tnc.net, sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a story. Okay, so we covered this on the show on Tuesday, but earlier this week on Monday, the Liberal government, led by Justice Minister Arif Virani, introduced their new censorship bill, Bill C-63, which they call the Online Harms Act. It was tabled in the House of Commons. I walked through the entire bill on my show on Tuesday, so I encourage you to go check that out if you haven't already. Basically, gist of this document, of this bill, is two things. It really tries to do two things. One is the whole protecting children from what they call sexual exploitation, porn, all that kind of thing, the predation of predators, protecting children. But they also included this entire other component, which is cracking down on so-called hate speech, harmful content, including introducing all kinds of new punishment and really dangerous territory, things that you can get convicted of for simply writing your opinion online, and if that opinion goes against sort of the ruling mob, you could find yourself in a great deal of trouble. So according to the government's own communication on this bill, they write that the government of Canada is introducing legislation to combat harmful content online, including sexual exploitation of children. So again, the emphasis is entirely on protecting children. Then they kind of just like sneak the other components in, and that is the greatest concern, because these other components are what we should all be worried about. Trumark covered this article right? So the Liberals Online hate bill contains $70,000 fines for speech and potential life imprisonment. All for speech, not for being convicted of any crime, but just for things that you would write potentially online. Go to prison for life. The bill increases the maximum sentence, what they call advocating genocide, which is incredibly loose. You have to say what they mean by advocating. You have to say what genocide means. For advocating genocide, if the punishment went from 5 years up to life in prison, go to life, you go to prison for life for simply writing things online. So, as you expect in a free society, a lot of people oppose this bill. All of the leading civil liberties and civil rights organizations came out against it. So this is the left-wing Canadian Civil Liberties Association. They put a press release urging substantial amendments to the online harms bill. They write that one troubling aspect of Bill C-63 is the vast authority bestowed upon a newly established body comprising government appointees to interpret the law, make up new rules, enforce them, and then serve as judge, jury, and executioner. Granting such sweeping powers to one body undermines the fundamental principle of democratic accountability. Furthermore, the bill's provisions, which include sweeping new search powers of electronic data with no warrant requirement, pose significant threats to privacy rights. The bill provides for unacceptable intrusions into individuals' digital lives. So, like I said, this is a surveillance state. We're talking about government commissioners empowered by themselves, operating on their own. I think it says it perfectly when it says that this government body will act as judge, jury, and executioner. One of the things that the Civil Liberties Association also mentioned was that Bill C-63 risks censoring a range of expression, including journalistic reporting. So even the left-wing Civil Liberties Association, we're reading a lot about saying journalists should oppose this bill. Journalists should be worried because it will censor journalistic reporting. Similarly, the more libertarian associated or oriented Canadian Constitution Fund also came out opposed to this bill. They wrote about their concerns. It says here, the Canadian Constitution Foundation is deeply concerned by the Online Harms Act introduced in the House of Commons in 2026, will significantly hamper constitutionally protected expression. And here is a quote from Executive Director Joanna Barron saying the Justice Minister Irani has tied these speech restrictions to defensible measures like removing images of child sexual exploitation material and revenge porn. But don't be fooled. Most of the bill is aimed at restricting freedom of expression. This heavy-handed bill needs to be severely pared down to comply with the Constitution. So I think this is a really important point, really interesting point. Don't be fooled. The whole point of this bill, most of the bill, is about restricting freedom of expression. They lead with the idea about protecting children, but that's really not what this is about. It's about so much more. And likewise, Michael Geist, who is the former head of the CRTC, he is a law professor, and he wrote on his website why the Criminal Code and Human Rights Act provisions should be removed from the online contract. And yeah, he was the Canada Research Chair in Internet and Commerce Law at the University of Ottawa as well. And he breaks it down pretty clearly. He says that Bill C-63 is effectively 4 bills in one. So first is the online contract. Second, it's expansion of mandatory pornography reporting. Third, it's a criminal code provisions, which opens up the door to life in prison for committing offenses when they're and fourth, it's changes to the Canadian Human Rights Act, which restores hated Section 13. And so basically what he says is that there's a huge difference between the first two and the latter two. The first two are focused on the obligations of internet platforms and consumer platforms. The latter two have nothing to do with internet platforms at all. So he's basically urging us to listen to really have a proper debate on this. And that's what you would come to expect, right? You're going to put out a piece of legislation. It's a huge omnibus bill, essentially covering 4 different things. And rather than criticizing the bill, as a civil liberties organizations and as a law professors, what do we see from the mainstream? Well, that's a silly question because we know exactly how the legacy media is going to cover this. They did exactly what the Liberals wanted. They did exactly what the Justice Minister did when he introduced the bill, which is that they focus entirely on the keeping kids safe, or the popular part, the thing that almost every Canadian can agree with, and they didn't really bother to address it anyhow. So this is how Global News Toronto covered the news. This is how they introduced it to the Canadian public.
Alhamdulillah, the gratitude goes first and foremost to Allah and then to each and every one of you. And as you have no idea, life-changing emotions that these people have whenever you come through for them. It is overwhelming to know that there are still Muslims who care and those who are compassionate, even with your dua that you make.
We are here today in Cairo, Egypt, putting aid together for the people. We have canned beef, tuna, we have molasses, we have sugar, things that are not going to expire because the borders are backed up.
We've been supporting a lot of refugees in all of these hot spots where Muslims are being persecuted and oppressed and even killed for that matter. And many refugees in their camps, through your help and through your commitments financially, you were able to help so many children. There's so many beautiful things that are happening that we have been collaborating with and working with, and they have boots on the ground.
The federal government has tabled a long-awaited bill designed to protect children from online harm. Bill C-63 promises to tackle child endangerment online and put a stop to the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. Changes to the criminal code and the Canadian Human Rights Act will also be made, and it will be mandatory to report online child pornography. It also includes stiffer punishments for hate propaganda and a pledge to hold social media platforms accountable for the material they host.
So again, you can see by the way that this is covered, is it covered exactly the way the Liberals want to be covered. This is all about safety, all about protecting kids, all about making the internet a safer place against predators, which again is probably something that we can all get behind. It's something that Canadians all generally agree with. Let's protect kids. Let's keep them innocent. Let's not let them around creepy perverts. Like that's pretty basic stuff. But the media isn't telling you the truth about this bill. They want you to think that it's just about saving kids. The CBC Toronto or the Global News Toronto thing is pretty innocuous. It's pretty just basic data reporting. But then you get into like the really malicious stuff. So here's how the CBC decided to cover the story. They found that they went into the archives. They reached out to Amanda Todd's mother.
Oh my
Remember,
God.
Amanda Todd is the 15-year-old girl that committed suicide back in 2012. Back in 2012, she committed suicide. She posted a YouTube video explaining how she was being bullied online, how she was the victim of sexual exploitation, and she ended up sadly, tragically killing herself. Again, this is 12 years ago now, right? So I know it was a huge story at the time, and it led to a lot of sort of public awareness about how to engage online and the dangers of having children acting sexually online. You know, the reason that Amanda Todd was so tormented is because she would go onto her webcam and basically get naked in front of the boys in her grade. And then they use those images to bully her and kind of blackmail her. It was all very tragic, very sad. But the CBC is bringing up this story, tracked down the mother of this girl, her mother that had to live through that horrible tragedy of her daughter killing herself. And here they have her coming up to defend Justin Trudeau, to explain why Trudeau is right to introduce this sweeping new legislation. So we have that clip from CBC aired on February 27th. Let's play that clip.
Joining me now for reaction to the bill is Carol Todd. Her daughter, Amanda Todd, was a victim of cyberbullying and online extortion at just 15 years old. Carol joins us now from Coquitlam, British Columbia. So, Carol, thank you for joining us. How do you think this act could help teenagers who are facing some of the same struggles that Amanda did?
I think this Online Harms Act, we can call it an online safety legislation, will put another layer of protection and safeguarding in the online world where kids and youth and even adults are in daily and hourly, right? And so we need to have the social media platforms and all these things in place for liability, for privacy, for protecting our citizens.
Nous croyons que les relations durables reposent sur la confiance. Vous pouvez compter sur nous pour combler vos attentes et même les surpasser. C'est ça, la différence Genesis.
This is so manipulative. So they take this poor mother, get her to explain how somehow this bill, which I'm guessing she probably hasn't read the bill this morning, but she says this bill probably could have saved her daughter's life. So her daughter, again, tragically died because she was engaging in antisocial sexual behavior online. And rather than having a parent who was there to guide her child and say, no, don't take your clothes off for strange men on the internet or for boys on the internet or for strangers on the internet, instead she's saying, what we really need is more government legislation to create a censorship regime, and somehow that would have saved my daughter's life. I mean, again, the whole thing is so cynical that CBC would even reach out to this woman as if she's some kind of an expert on the topic. Right. Why? Because her daughter was involved in a sad, tragic story. This mother let her daughter down, I'm sorry to say, but she let her daughter down.
Yes.
Again, one of the things that I don't think that we talk about enough is how dangerous the internet can be for children. It's not good for kids. Parents should take on more responsibility in stopping their kids from spending too much time online, from engaging in antisocial behavior.
Like what happened to pen pals?
Doing things like what Amanda Todd did. Parents should take a greater role in protecting their children. They shouldn't turn to the government to demand vast layers of censorship and surveillance and all kinds of things to protect kids. Parents should be the ones there. So I'm really opposed, and I think it's disgusting that CBC interviewed the woman, played that clip. Again, that's sort of what we can expect from the CBC. And again, just emphasizing the part that Justin Trudeau wanted to emphasize, the part that this is just all about saving kids like Amanda Todd. If this legislation was in place, Amanda Todd wouldn't have killed herself, apparently. It's just really manipulative stuff from the legacy media. And another thing that we saw the media doing, this is a story from the Canadian press. And you'll recall that the Canadian press does receive funding from the Trudeau government. They get a multitude of funds, including the Canada Periodical Fund and the Local Journalism Initiative, which are grants from the Trudeau government to pay for its funding. So the the Canadian press wrote a story. The headline that they gave it is that child safety and not censorship is the focus of the online arms bill, according to Trudeau. Right? So it says, child safety, not censorship, the focus of online harms bill, Trudeau. And this headline appeared in newspapers across the country, using exactly Trudeau's perspective, verbatim, saying it's just about child safety, not about censorship. This is what Trudeau wants you to be. Just take a look at this. This is what it looks like on Twitter. You can see that every single headline said the exact same thing. It's just Trudeau's words wrapped up into a headline.
That's hysterical.
The legacy media just take Trudeau government's talking points, take a look at talking points, publish it as news. This is what happens when you have a bought and paid for media. They just do exactly what Trudeau said. And so within that news story, you can see the exact same thing. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is promising that his government will prevail to legislate against online harms that focus on making the internet safer for minors, while not censoring Canadians. Of course, that's what the Liberals say. They're lying. The Liberals aren't telling you the truth, but that's what they're saying. And then instead of being skeptical about it, being critical of it, which is the goal of free press, the media just tells you what Trudeau is saying about the bill, barely even mentioning what all these other opposition people are saying. It's a big bait and switch, right? They're saying it's about child safety, which I think most Canadians get behind. I have my own concerns. I think, again, it's probably the role of parents to do a lot of this kind of stuff rather than a heavy-handed government. But I think most parents, most Canadians can get behind the idea that there should be more protections for kids online. Fine. The bait and switch is that, as the critics said, as the civil liberties organization, as Michael Dice, as the law experts, law professors say, this is getting into censorship territory. This is getting into surveillance state territory. So they do the bait and switch. And then when all else fails, they simply go to attacking Justin Trudeau's opposition, Pierre Poilievre. So we saw a taste of this last Friday before the bill was even introduced on February 23rd. We covered this in the show as well. True Northman Andrew Lawton was at a press conference with Pierre Poilievre last Wednesday. He asked a question about the upcoming online harms bill because everyone knows it's been coming down the pipe. They've been talking about this legislation for 2+ years. So we've known it's been coming for a long time. Pierre Poilievre was asked about it, and he didn't mince words. Let's put it that way. I played the clip on my show yesterday against Justin Trudeau. Well, here is Breakfast Television's Sid Seixeiro. He a very popular broadcaster. He's got a big following. He's a sports guy, and I'm going to play this clip. I'll walk you through it and point out a couple of my critiques about this way that the media go after Pierre Poilievre. But here is Sid Seixeiro from last Friday, prior to the legislation being introduced, criticizing Pierre Poilievre proactively for criticizing Trudeau for the upcoming online harms act. So let's play that clip.
Canada's federal political situation. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have been sitting pretty easy here for a while, and depending on the poll that you look at, reputable polls in this country, the Conservatives are anywhere from 15 to 20 points up, depending on the week and depending on the story. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have a long way to go. This is just a latest example. This is a Nanos research poll. 17.
Just pause it there for a second.
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau has a long way to go. So even this way he's talking about it.
Yeah.
Pierre Poilievre is popular because he's talking about you.
What? No. Okay. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Go away. Okay, I guess we'll do that.
Canadians agree with. Canadians are so tired of Justin Trudeau, so tired of his divisiveness, so tired of his left-wing agenda that is making life so difficult for so many Canadians. I mean, I don't have to go through it all. You guys know what I'm talking about. Obviously, the Conservatives are up because they have a more popular leader and they have better ideas, and Canadians want to change. But yeah, just the way he's prefacing this whole thing, saying that Liberals have a way to go, they got to catch up, they got to win this thing back, and you can see that's where this is going. Okay, let's keep this moving.
For Pierre Poilievre and the federal Conservatives. Now, again, we're not looking at an election till October of 2025-ish. That's kind of the time frame. But yesterday was a very interesting day because Pierre Poilievre, in the media availability, kind of let it fly. And we haven't seen this from the Conservative leader in a bit. Here is a synopsis of what was said yesterday. Pierre Poilievre is against impending legislation that would combat hate speech, terrorist content, and violent material online. The bill isn't even written yet. But he went after Trudeau for that. He also said Trudeau was not
just the way that he phrased that again. So he's saying, the Liberals are introducing this great bill that will go after hate speech and terrorism, and Pierre Poilievre has the audacity to go against it, even though it isn't even written. I've got news for you. It was written. It was written last week. It was written 2 weeks ago. This thing had been leaked all throughout the press. By last Friday, it was written. I mean, it was introduced first thing Monday morning.
Yeah.
So this guy's not even factually correct to say the bill isn't to be written. It's come through several iterations. We've been seeing it coming, like I said, for a long time now. Hence why Andrew Martin asked Pierre Poilievre that question in the first place. So it's not even factually true, and just the way that he presented that bill there, it is designed to make you want to support Justin Trudeau. And like, how dare Pierre Poilievre have the audacity to come out against censorship?
Leader to introduce this legislation because he wore blackface and racist costumes in the past. Poilievre went on to say he is against transgender women in female bathrooms, change rooms, and in sports. Also, he said Trudeau should stay out of New Brunswick provincial legislation that would no longer protect US LGBTQ+ students in school. So there are a lot of very important issues here.
Again, just pause it right there. The way that he frames that, he's saying that Pierre Poilievre said to stay out of New Brunswick schools. And then what was happening in New Brunswick schools? Well, the way that Sid explains it is that somehow the government was cracking down on gay kids, cracking down on sexual minorities. I'm not calling it student at all. It's just saying that the parents who informed the child has to sexually transition, right? But the way he framed it was about protecting kids with it, talked about the past, and that the media, they didn't tell you protecting your rights or whatever, when really there's something a lot deeper. And just to what Sid said before that, the Justin Trudeau wore blackface and Peter probably agreed with that. Yeah, it's really important to note that a guy who, again, we know Justin Trudeau's past. We know that he was sort of a reckless
3 times.
everyone else.
First time
Didn't do a lot.
it was a play. The second time was a Halloween costume. Third time was just a bad judgment call.
The fact that he was a Trudeau and that he's cared for them. And kind of used his celebrity power to weasel his way to becoming the leader of this country. He was stuck in the past. But I think it's perfectly fine and perfectly correct to note that Justin Trudeau has this past. Like the way the journalist is talking about it is like, how dare Pierre Poilievre mention that our prime minister used to just be like a total jerk and like totally insensitive and kind of racist. Like we already knew that. That came out before, so Pierre Poilievre shouldn't talk about it.
I don't know that
that's
much
relevant. Pierre
him
Poilievre
naked with a
mentioned that
tiger
all he wants.
on his tiger.
Clip some of
It's
it.
fucking hilarious picture.
He made a decision on publicly, Tam, and there were also just pot shots towards Justin Trudeau. Now, for those who've known Pierre Poilievre a long time, they will tell you this is Pierre Poilievre. The Pierre Poilievre that will just go at it. Now, the other side is the Conservatives have spent a lot of money trying to soften his image because there's some who believe that's not electable. I don't care what the facts say, that is not electable in certain parts of the country.
This is Jewel, VP of the Executive Company, about to use Grammarly to handle the charge. Yeah, she's not relevant anymore. Just as them on my prize. That's not good for safety. The Jules has an idea. And Grammarly's tone suggestions should help bring it to life. Even spark the capture. Because your confident tone can get your team on board and inspired. Just like that. Already confident. Our venture. Now the team just needs to pick an edible glitter. Robert wants that. This one, and not a category. This is going nowhere. Grammarly can frame your message to focus on solution, to get a quick resolution. Caviar confess it is. Only time to find the right audio. How do you know not that one? Yeah. That one. Yum. Nice. Oh no, a project hiccup. You need a squeaky bottle. Good idea. With a more diplomatic approach, your request will get a better response. Oh, I like the sound of that. Brilliant. See? Problem solved. With Grammarly, getting the tone just right makes all the difference in your professional success. Click the blue button to download Grammarly today.
So just having like an analysis there as to whether Pierre Poilievre is allowed to be mean in politics, whether he's allowed to take pot shots at the Liberals. Newsflash, it's politics. Watch 5 minutes of question period and you'll just see pot shot after pot shot back and forth. That's what these guys do for a living. That's what we want them to do. We want them to vehemently disagree and oppose each other. I used to talk about this a lot on my show. The thing that drove me crazy the most when Aaron O'Toole was leader of the Conservative Party was that he agreed with the Liberals on too many things. So there were too many times where there was unanimous consent in the House of Commons where everybody agreed, where they passed these sweeping bills or these motions, and there was no opposition at all, and they would cheer that on as if that was like a sign of progress in Canada. No, we don't all agree in this country, and the point of an opposition is to oppose the government. That is what Pierre Poilievre is doing. He has to work to that, and that is why Canadians are supportive of him. We saw that 40%, 42%, to the Liberals, 20%. So Canadians want that. It's good for the country when we have people opposing the government and we have different views being represented in our parliament. And yet we have these journalists sort of hand-wringing and feeling upset about it, and like, how dare Pierre Poilievre say mean things to our prime minister, using euphemism and using government talking points to talk about important issues in our country. And this goes to deeper problems of like, what is really going on here? What is the deeper concern with this bill, with this censorship, with Trudeau's new introduction of a surveillance state? There's another story that came out this week that I wanted to quickly mention and tie together, because this is a big story. So on Thursday, we learned through the bombshell report that the fired scientists from the Winnipeg lab had in fact worked closely and covertly with the Chinese government, this according to a CSIS report. So basically, CSIS just finally confirmed what we have all known for a very, very long time, which is that these two scientists, these federal government employees who were working in a microbiology lab, a national lab in Winnipeg, they were escorted out of the lab 2019 and were fired in 2021. We've known those for a long time. We speculated that these were spies, that these were people working with the communist regime. Well, CSIS has basically just come right out and confirmed that. A huge story. It's incredibly important for Canadians to know that this was happening on our browsers. So many examples of sort of Chinese interference, Chinese presence, communist presence, the Chinese communist government. So not just the Chinese communist government having a presence in Canada, being deeply sort of involved in our institutions, having clandestine plans, and this has just been confirmed. At the time when the Conservatives were asking these questions, I want to show you how Justin Trudeau responded to those questions at the time. What did he do? Well, he basically accused anybody asking him questions of, you guessed it, being racist. This is Justin Trudeau's favorite play from his playbook. If you ask him a question and just want to answer, he'll come up with a way to call you a racist. Play this clip. This is from May 26, 2021.
And in this research and this cooperation team that not only doesn't have our interests in mind, but actually wants to hurt Canada.
Yes, from the beginning of my career onwards, I have worked with many Chinese Canadians, and indeed fundraisers with them. The rise of racism over the past month should be a concern to everyone. I would recommend members of the Conservative Party zeal to make personal attacks not push too far into intolerance towards Canadians of diverse origins. We will continue to stand to defend Canadians' interests, Canadian security. We will continue to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep Canadians safe while participating in the global research community and stand up for tolerance and diversity.
All about tolerance and diversity there for the Prime Minister. So so much as ask about the scientists who were escorted out of the lab right before COVID hit, and then later we learned that they were actually communist spies. If you even ask about that, it's because you, what did he say, have a zeal for personal attacks and you're engaging in anti-Asian racism. So that's Justin Trudeau's first favorite play. Accuse your opponents of being racist. The second thing that Justin Trudeau does, and we saw him doing that just the other day, was that he blames conspiracy theories, he blames independent media, he blames what he calls social media drivers. In this case, he was talking about the declining trust in media. He believes that the only reason that he's behind in the polls and the only reason that Canadians don't media anymore is because they're being fooled and they're being tricked by conspiracy theorists. So that's Justin Trudeau's second claim. And his third one, as we'll see in this clip. So this is from back in October. Justin Trudeau's dealing with some heckler on the street who confronts him and just says, "You're ruining the country." What does Justin Trudeau say in response? "You must be listening to Vladimir Putin." Yes, that's what he said. Let's play this clip.
Le roi peut être toujours connecté. Connecté à son réseau, à ses amis. Il n'y a pas meilleure façon de vivre qu'avoir la unbelievable de décider.
Hey there, the entire country got our buddy over there. Can anybody afford a home in this day? 9 V8s here idling for 30 minutes. Your parking footprint is we're getting charged for what? It's not stopping, no parking. Right. I don't think so. You're sending it over to Ukraine, right? You send it over to the guy that slaughtered his own country. Putin? No.
Oh. You've been listening to Putin, haven't you? I mean, like I'm not a big fan of vulgar language and heckling someone, but you know, there's a patriot out on the street, common sense guy, pointing out to the prime minister some true facts about the carbon tax, the hypocrisy of having all these SUVs outside idling, or paying more carbon tax. Trudeau tries to go into his basically like his list of lies about how the carbon tax is actually good for you when you actually get money, which is not actually true. And then the guy says you're sending money to Ukraine. He's like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. The only reason you don't like me is because you're listening to the enemy. You're basically a traitor. So what does this all say? Justin Trudeau, we know this. He wants to silence his opponents. He wants to divide Canadians. He wants to separate us into little groups and pit us against each other. He truly believes that people who oppose him are propagandists or conspiracy theorists or just flat out traitors. And now he is weaponizing his ideology into legislation. He wants to make it illegal for you to disagree with him. Not just illegal. He wants you to pay a $7,000 fine and face life in prison for saying or thinking the wrong thing. This puts a chill on freedom of expression in our country because even if you are thinking about posting something, you have a second thought because of this. You don't know exactly where the line is because we don't have definitions for any of these things. Hate speech, propaganda, advocating genocide. We don't have definitions for them. We know those words have been taken out of context and manipulated over the last several years by the sort of Orwellian language. It's like, what does the word genocide even mean anymore? People get accused of committing genocide for all kinds of reasons, for all kinds of things. We hear that there's a trans genocide or there's a First Nations genocide or there's just these words don't even have meanings anymore. But the idea is that you can face fines and to go to jail just for saying the wrong thing. If Canada were a free country with a free press, the media would be ringing alarm over this assault on our God-given right to freedom of speech and support and involvement. But sadly, Canada is not a free country. We do not have a free press. We have a media ecosystem that's been bought and paid for by the Trudeau government, by the liberals. The media, they don't do anything, or they do the opposite. They cheer on Justin Trudeau. They applaud his efforts to censor opinions that they don't like. And they gaslight you by telling you it's all about safety and protecting children. Well, it isn't. This is more than that. This is a coordinated attack on our basic and God-given freedoms, and every Canadian should oppose this bill. Thank you so much for listening. You have a great weekend. Stay goodbye. I'm Candice Monko, and this is the Candice Monko Show.
Yes, I see you.
Manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief, and therefore craves, and convenience despite negative consequences. So the definition that involves pleasure, relief, craving in the short term, harm in the long term, probably the physician would know, and to any number of other opinions. And my contention is that all addictions, they're not primary problems, they're not inherited diseases, they're not aggravations, they're not moral failures, they're attempts to gain pain relief, emotional pain relief, for something or another. And so the first question of addiction for me is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And so we have to look at why the pain, we have to look at people's lives, their life experience, their trauma, their adversity, their suffering. And so that's why I say that, when you talk to other people, once you get from addiction, they'll say peace of mind, they'll say connection with other people, they say sense of control, they say stress relief, they say sense of purpose. Those are all supremely human qualities. In fact, they're qualities that we all want. In fact, have every right to expect. So that's why I said there's nothing more human than addiction. Now, the problem, of course, is it creates more things. But the impulse is simply, the addict just wants to feel like a normal human being. That's all.
It's such a profoundly different way of looking at addiction compared to, I think, the norm of society, certainly the way many people view addicts. There's a certain view that the addict is on the street corner, is homeless, is destitute. Yet we often don't want to put that mirror up and look at our own lives and go, oh wow, by your definition, by that definition, there's probably very few of us who can honestly hold our hands up and say, at some point in our life, we were addicted to something.
I think in this society, hardly anybody. Hence, in part, hence the type of the measure of normal. We think that so many things are normal, then we have normal people who are different from us. I'm saying that that's a myth. That from the most abject and most dependent and most ill drug-addicted people that I work with in Vancouver, Canada, to the most elevated segments of society, addiction is just rife. And we completely are blind when we choose one segment of the population to ostracize and to punish and to feel superior to it. And what we're really doing is denying our own humanity when we do that.
There's all manner of different things that people can be addicted to. I want to talk about one which I don't think is spoken about enough, and that's online pornography. It is something that I think it's just seeping there underneath. People aren't talking about it. I remember one of my not that long ago, this young man couldn't look at me. He could look at me on so ashamed, and he was just ashamed how he was addicted to pornography. And that was anyone to share. I was a single person. I was the first person he told us. What was really interesting, as I got to know him, and I built trust with him, rapport, and knew that he could open up with me, and I wasn't going to judge him or invalidate him or look down on him. Actually, for this particular chap in his life, he was very isolated. He didn't have a tribe, he didn't have a community. There was no part of his life where he felt like he belonged. And for him, the ultimate solution was actually joining a boxing club. It wasn't just the physical activity, it was the tribe he got. I remember he said to me, he said, before I joined the boxing club, if someone said to me, who's an impressed, I wouldn't do a single one. But in a boxing gym, 10 means 10. And my conclusion with him was simply that he was missing tribe, he was missing community. So in the hole that left inside him, he decided to fill that hole with online pornography. It was a symptom of the problem, which really speaks to what you just said.
Well, a number of things come up as I listen to this anecdote. One is the compassion that's required for people to open up and to actually hear. And so one of my teachers said, compassion is present if people love it. So I know that these are three core values that you often talk about is compassion. And that's what this man needed, to be able to open up and share and to look at himself honestly. That's the first thing. Secondly, when you study people addicted to pornography, they're not actually addicted to pornography. It's not about sex. It's about
temporary spike of dopamine in their brain. Dopamine being the brain chemical that makes us feel alive and vital and excited. Now, something happened to this man. He shut down that mechanism to immediately exclude stimulation and titillation and pornography to get that dopamine to feel alive. He wanted to feel alive. That's what he wanted. Then he connects with the boxing movement. Insistence on going to the sleep. And then he gets his engagement with the food. All of a sudden, he gets his meat in a much healthier way. So, again, to criticize him and ostracize him and to shame him, to shame himself. He just wants to feel like a normal human being. That's what he wants.
What's the matter with him?
That's good addiction. That's a preference. Some things are acceptable addiction. It's not an acceptable addiction. Heroin is not an acceptable addiction. It's okay to be addicted. It's okay to be addicted to something. One of the things that I feel really hateful is that it doesn't mean that you need to do nothing about it, but I think it's people realize
this is a society that's trying to demand people to be other than who they are. Because the demand, the expectations that we see in infrastructure, in workplaces, in education institutions, in families, in social settings, where we ourselves we risk being rejected. So there is almost a universal demand for self-expression, which is because you and I know creates both mental and physical health problems. So that the core value is just fundamentally materialistic individuals with aggressive ways where we need to engage. And you look at how we accomplish. Where would you study? You understand the explanation. You study what you do. Would you study modern Savannah or wherever it is, where she lives? Let's study in a natural environment. In our natural environment, we're talking about eons, of millions, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, even about 90% of our existence as a species, we lived out in nature, in small band hunter-gatherers, connected, engaged, belonging, connected to nature, connected to our gut feelings, we have to be otherwise we wouldn't survive. That's what we do. We can adapt to other environments, but that doesn't mean that we can thrive in them as well.
The 60th anniversary edition of World is almost here. Play on Kindle.
We're like two people right now. We're living in a natural environment. It's not suggesting we go back to the hunter-gatherers, but I think we realize it is wrong. And our social system in which we live right now demands that we should be laws.
Once our lives get out because, as you mentioned, so much of my life, I think find myself that it's actually important to what's important, being a winner, what's important, and as I shed a lot of these behavioral adaptations to my own childhood, I find an instant peace and contentment and calm that I never had before. And actually, it's really interesting because you do that, and a lot of the tendencies I had they fall away. You're not feeling the time. You're not trying to stop the addiction. I feel a lot of the time, especially people like alcohol. Medical doctors, we say, this is the limit. You should drink under 14 units of alcohol
think I find a lot of public unhelped by understand the need for it. But A, it's dry. B, there's no understanding within that of what role does it play in that person's life. So the classic case for someone like Apple is New Year. On January 1st, it's different, different. Right, I'm not going to fall into the trap I fell in before. I'm going to cut down. They do they're not drinking at all, but when the stress of work is still there, when the toxic relationship that they're in is still there, the boss that doesn't value them is still there. The sweetness is playing a role, right? Serving a need. And coming back to this cultural block, you mentioned where would you send your children? Yeah. I think it's too long to make it feel that we are. A lot of that. We are no longer really, I can put my hand on my arm and say, I'm not compatible anymore. That was a trait I felt. But some people say competition is natural, and I guess my view that it comes down to the relationship and with that competition. So it's a little bit of competition.
Well, yeah, but especially I know some of the person do that. Being from the subcontinent to the UK and your parents, with all that will, they put this pressure on you to excel. That if you were, I think I heard you say once that when we got 99% right there, your mother would say, well, come on, how come you get 100? You have to be the best. Yeah, no. You do that. The anxiety that you look to see, then you can become disadvantaged being immigrants and making people colorful. But as a result, you become competitive. That's not even nature, that's second nature. But even in the phrase second nature, there's unification. So there's the first nature. And the first nature is you weren't the wrong. You want to manifest yourself. And then think you can really get yourself. Not to be better than anybody else. To dominate or to subjugate somebody else. But you just want to be your best. Well, that's great. The idea that we're individually competitive creatures really comes along with the rise of capitalism, which is a system based on competition where it is dog and dog, and where the bigger fish is full of the smaller ones. And as we can see this happening right now with the tremendous rise of inequality in the last decade. 8 people in the world now who have much wealth at the 40%. And I think now the interesting thing about human nature is that when people do something selfish or competitive, what do we say? Well, that's just human nature. But when people do something selfless and crime, nobody says, oh, that's just human nature. So there's an assumption in this culture. And what we do is we take the core values and we project them onto human beings that way. And to the extent that we try to conform to it, we create suffering for ourselves. Now, competition as you see very different matches. In this capitalist world, even that gets distinguished, not in the sense of the player distinguishing, but in the sense of we're going to get the best players in the world and we're going to get the most money for the Russian where we'll model and go over to the next superior argument. Even on that level, what's meant to be played, it's no longer played. That business is dominating go play. There's no consequences to the it's a process, just for the enjoyment, just for the sheer pleasure of the activity. These things are meant to play. The circuit in the brain is designated to play. There is a principle in the development of the child development, or the brain development. But even your play
When John was a boy, he wrote down his dreams. The joy is that by the age of 24, he achieved his dreams. Right, so yes, he played cricket, and then he helped England win the World Cup in the most fairy tale situation. He hits the winning goal in the final minute of the World Cup. The sort of thing that kids all over the world now would dream about doing. You get it? He's like, it's my goal for the next. As the ball will let his feet even before it went through the goal. Hero. I find his story incredibly fascinating. It hits the boxes of what society says you need to do to be actually successful. Yet it left me with this inner turmoil that he says, I would say many things, but one thing I remember is he said, I used to play with it. At some point it changed from being joyful and playful to something that said something about who I was. And winning is something about